Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, if you think that you've already been watching Britain's population explosion, then you haven't seen anything yet. New data from the Office for National Statistics, which was released yesterday, reveals that the UK's population, get this, is set to reach 72.5 million people by the year 2032. Not far away at all. Entirely fueled by a 4.9 million increase in net migration, now the only driver of our population growth. That's an increase equivalent to more than 4 cities the size of Birmingham. By the year 2047, just 22 years from now, which really, again, isn't that long, not far away at all, our population will explode by 9 million people, equivalent to another London. The proportion of our population is now growing exponentially. By the time a 5-year-old today turns just 31 years of age, 1 in 3 people on these islands will have been born somewhere else. Let me say that again. By the year 2051, it's estimated 1 in 3 of every people on these islands will have been born somewhere else. And the thing about this radical shift in our makeup of the country is that while politicians claim that they want to get immigration down, 2/3 of members of parliament actually believe, according to new polling this week, that we should continue mass immigration to grow the economy. This transformation of our country, with its 1,000-year-plus history, was all done without a single person in the country actually voting for it. Who voted for mass uncontrolled immigration? It's a question I ask MPs all the time. I've yet to meet anybody who voted for this. But the simple truth is that politicians don't want to admit is that actually this policy can be changed. We can stop this if we want to. But very few people in Westminster really want to get their arms around this issue. For too long, politicians have pretended that the status quo is simply inevitable, but it isn't. We've seen time and time again that when there is a political will from our leaders, then there is a way. Look no further than the way that our authorities behaved during the COVID pandemic or during the aftermath of the Southport atrocities. The real reason that immigration is not coming down in any serious way, let's be honest, is because our leaders don't want to bring it down, nor does big business. It helps big business. It keeps the cost of labour low, it keeps their profits high. And they don't really care that you don't want mass immigration, so on and on we go with this extreme policy experiment that's making us poorer, not richer, and which, as recent research has shown, is also driving crime and undermining our social fabric. As ever, let me know your views tonight at gbnews.com/yoursay or hit me up on X at GoodwinMJ. But I'm joined tonight by top pollster and CEO and founder of Electoral Calculus, Martin Baxter. Martin, the mood music on immigration out there in the country is changing, is it not? I'm looking at polls. I'm seeing people becoming more sceptical. I'm seeing them becoming a little bit more negative about this experiment, because that's what it is. It's an experiment. Nobody really knows how this level of demographic change is going to go. And they seem to be, I think, becoming a little bit more opposed to mass immigration. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. We have this interesting poll from Ipsos that came out recently, which asked people, assume that there was a trade-off between reducing immigration and hurting the economy, which some economists might disagree with, but let's take that as their statement. And they asked people whether it was better to reduce immigration, even if it hurt the economy, or to do the reverse. And amongst the general public, figures were 62% were in favour of restricting immigration, with only 24% the other way. But then Ipsos...
So a majority of people out there in the country want to reduce it, and a majority of people in Parliament basically want to keep the status quo.
That was the other interesting thing that Ipsos did. They also surveyed MPs as well.
Right.
And on the MPs were the other way around. 49% of MPs were for keeping immigration high and only 31% against. So it's a little bit of a difference in opinion between MPs and the public, a bit like we had with Brexit back in 2016, where most MPs were against it, but the public were in favour.
So essentially we've got this sort of elite minority that's more socially liberal, that's more pro-immigration, which is not representing the values and the voice of people out there in the country, the forgotten majority. Now, how does that find its expression politically? Because what we've also seen in the polls this this past week, we've got Reform now again number 2 in the polls. We've had them actually number 1 in a recent poll as well. I mean, is it the immigration issue that's driving that change as well?
It's probably a number of factors, if we're honest, but immigration could certainly be one of the major ones. It probably was for Donald Trump's victory in the United States. So the issues there were immigration, the economy and inflation. And we may see similar things in Britain as well. So we did a poll recently with Find Out Now that just came out today, showing that only 5% of Britons think that Labour usually acts in the national interest.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's come out today?
That's come out today. And overall, the figures for Labour as a government are not great. That
that's being diplomatic.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I used to do a bit of polling myself. I mean, the numbers are abysmal. I mean, only 16% of people out there approve of Keir Starmer's performance, according to YouGov.
Yes, well, we like to take an average of the poll of polls, but even then it is very bad that Keir Starmer's on minus 35%.
Minus 35.
Net
you know
approval.
what I call that? I call that Prince Andrew territory. That's what minus 35 is.
Kemi Badenoch on minus 16, Nigel Farage on minus 9. Everybody is minus, but some are more minus than others.
So Kemi Badenoch minus 16. So she's actually seemingly not cutting through.
That's, slightly worse than it was.
So it's getting worse, her ratings are
getting worse. Okay. Whereas Reform are definitely on a tear in the polls, that they are up and Labour is down. So this month, for the first month ever, our monthly poll of polls has Reform ahead of the Conservatives, just by 1%, but ahead of the Conservatives, only 2% behind Labour. So it's a three-horse race at the moment. And an interesting nugget is if Reform were to gain another 3% just in the polls, then if there were a general election, Reform would be the largest party and Nigel Farage might be Prime Minister. So,
OK, just say that again. So Reform currently averaging, what, 25%?
24 we have.
24%.
Labour
if they get another 3 points, if they get up to 27... and we were to have a general election, they emerge as the largest party.
Yes, so they'd probably have to do a coalition with the Conservatives. If they get another 3%, so 6% more than where they are now, so then 30%. They would have around 30%, 31, then they would have an absolute majority in the House of Commons. But again, this is still a little bit science fiction because there isn't going to be an election tomorrow because Labour certainly don't want to have one. But it's an incredible position for the country to be in just 6 months or so after the general election where Labour won a massive landslide. Yeah,
it is, Patrick, quite... I mean, this is unprecedented territory. It's only a few months on, Labour crashing and burning in the polls, Reform arguably as strong as the SDP were in the 80s. Immigration is at the heart of this, is it not?
Completely. And I think... I've written before in The Spectator that the Conservative Party is in the position of Les Dawson's mother-in-law, gone but not forgiven. And that's going to stay in position for a long time. The betrayal on the scale of immigration for a party that had promised 4 times in a row to bring it down, and particularly the Boris
Tories
way.
we're talking about
the Tories. That is going to put them on the naughty set for a long time. But Labour, I think, is ebbing away even as we speak. And I was looking at some figures on the economy today. The YouGov asks a monthly question, who's got the best policy for the economy? And Labour was down at 18% now. So that's below 1 in 5 people. And even the Tories on that have just nicked into a bit of a lead. And I can see a modest Tory poll recovery on the back of a traditional Tory looking after business message, because I don't quite think Reform has got the economy nailed in terms of who is their main spokesman on the economy and whether their agenda is shrink the state, Thatcherism, or protect the working class.
I'll just throw another stat out, Scarlett, that I read today, exclusively GB News, undertaken by the Centre for Migration Control. Of the Boris wave migrants who have come into the country since 2021, lots of them obviously dependents, the wives, the children of workers, actually very few workers overall. According to the Centre for Migration Control, that's cost the British taxpayer £35 billion. Now, there is a sense out there in the country, I see it in the polling, I hear it in focus groups when I'm sitting with voters, we hear it from people watching this show, that it's the entire elite, the entire establishment, left and right, utterly out of touch with people on this issue of mass immigration.
Well, then I think you haven't been listening to Labour, is that what they've been saying for a very long time is that the problem with working visas is that actually we don't have the skills here and we need to have the skills. I mean, if you look...
But how could we ever develop the skills here if we're relying on cheap migrant labour?
No, if you let me finish. So if you look at a graph about engineers, right, we desperately need engineers. So what happened was that engineering apprenticeships went down and the visas given to engineers went up. We should be training engineers for ourselves. We should be training doctors. We should be training nurses. What is so terrible about this country is we're not skilling up our own people. And that's how it's got to change.
So here's a question then, right? And then just before I come back to Martin, when I look at the numbers that came out this week with the Office for National Statistics, the government's forecasters, why are they assuming that net migration for the next 10 years or so is going to be at least 350,000 a year? Because there's lots of folks watching this show who will say, hang on a minute, that's higher than it was before Brexit. So why is Labour not saying we're not comfortable with net migration being even at 350,000 a year?
Because what Labour is not going to do, which is exactly what the Tories do, is to start putting figures on, because we don't know. But what we have to do is we have to work on, we have to change it. And the only way of changing it is to actually stop relying on people outside this country to come in and do the work and to actually skill up our own people.
That's tinkering, isn't it? We're in a whole new ball game in terms of public opinion on mass immigration. Neither of the big two parties gets it. Perhaps even reform isn't being as radical.
I've just explained what we're going to do, and it's not tinkering.
Let's hear from the pollster, Martin. I mean, there is a sense, you know, I look at the numbers, you know, regularly, and of the people coming into the country, only 22% are coming in on worker visas. We know, based on data from the Office for Budget Responsibility, mass immigration is often making us poorer, not richer. I mean, are voters aware of this reality with migration? Are they aware that it's bringing costs as well as benefits?
Well, I think I'm sure many voters can see that low-skilled immigration, which we do have a lot at the moment, depresses the wages of the low-skilled, which can, you know, hurt many people in the country. And I think at the time of Brexit, that feeling was in the air, and there was possibly the understanding by many people who voted for Brexit that that was going to be reduced, but the Conservatives did not. They kept it on. In fact,
they broke their promise.
Immigration increased after Brexit. So there's that, in a way, explains why the two major parties are less popular at the moment.
But hold on, Matt. I've been trying to explain what we're doing. All you're doing is saying this is terrible, but it's going to happen. And I'm saying that actually we can do something about it.
We'll do it. Bring the numbers down.